Well, I'd like to welcome everyone here tonight. My name is Jamie Perillo. I'm director here at the Saratoga Springs History Museum, and I see a lot of new faces in here this evening. So this program tonight is part of the Alfred Z. Solomon Charitable Trust program series, and it's one that we do every month here at the museum. So tonight I just want to say welcome. I'm glad you're here. A lot of folks in here are not members. We do have membership information about the History Museum, and we are the museum that's here in this building, in the Canfield Casino. So if you're interested in learning more about that, Tom, who's sitting back at the table, is very more than willing to talk to you about that, or talk to you about our murder mystery fundraiser coming up in December on the 8th, Murder in the Canfield Casino. Before we begin, we do have a long program tonight, friends. I want to ask, please silence your cell phones. I always forget to ask, but tonight I did remember to do that, and I silenced mine as well. So the way we're going to begin this evening is first we're going to have a 15 to 20 minute performance of music, all written by Katrina Trask, performed by Eileen Mack and Michael Clement. Following that, we're going to have a very short 5-minute break. And in that time, if anybody wants to get another drink of water, use the restroom, I encourage you to do that then, because the program, once it begins, will last about an hour and a half. And from there, we'll have a Q&A with Rumara following the program. And maybe we can talk about the clothing, everything that's in the room, or about the museum. So I just want to say thank you so much for coming. I hope everybody really enjoys this. Rumara worked so hard putting this together. So thank you so much. And with that, I will welcome Eileen and Michael to the center stage.
This is an invitation from Katrina. So I looked up Bertha Remick. She is the composer for the last song. But Katrina, I almost said Rumara, Katrina wrote the lyrics to everything. And this song, the music is by Albert Parsons, but there's only one person that could have written this song.
In the dawn
one may know what the crimson rose whispers to me alone, alone, as its leaves unfurl from its heart of gold. Nay, 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 it is all unknown, save to me and the deep red rose, the fairest flower that grows, that grows. No one may know what the crimson rose, as it hides in my breast, down from the cold is silently told. Nay, 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 it is unconfessed, save to me and the deep red rose, the fairest flower that grows, that grows. You're right. Okay. So that obviously was written by Katrina. We know her love of roses, and if you haven't been to the garden, well, you have to wait a few more months, but the roses will be back. And this song, I took part in a storytelling on Sunday where 8 tellers came and we told stories of resilience. And I believe this is Katrina's stories of resilience. The Lady of Yaddo rose from the fire of pain, rose upon wings of love. Bright and glorious, she rose from the ashes of grief, strong with the strength of the sun, and sang a song new and wonderful, which healed the soul of man. Therefore shall her crown of thorns be taken, and a wreath of speaking of children.
A child is born, who is the Virgin Son, and for the waiting world forlorn, redemption has begun. He comes in love with human form, born of a virgin mild, untouched by sin, all pure within, a holy, happy child. A child is born, a child is born. A child is born, a child is born, a child who is the King. Upon this blessed Christmas morn, glad hallelujahs ring. He comes in last from David's line, but wears no royal crown. Content to wait for kingly state, to mortals he comes down. A child is born, a child is born. A child is born, a child is born, a child who is the Lord. Even those who weep and mourn may sing with one accord. He comes to cheer, he comes to help, he comes mankind to save, his life to give that all may live. He comes to triumph for the grave. A child is born, a child is born.
So the next song, Michael realized he was familiar with the composer, so I looked him up. And Nathaniel Dett was a black composer, a choral conductor, and was a person who was able to bring the European sound combined with the sound of African-American spirituals. And I wish I knew the story of how Katrina met Nathaniel Dett. God understands. So this song, Rumara was going to have a pianist try to play, come and play some of her music, but then the pianist wasn't able to come. So she called up and said, I have all this music, and she's a fabulous painter, an amazing researcher, but she didn't understand about the music, so she sent me some things she took pictures of, and so I kind of tapped out this song and played it to her, and after that she said, maybe we should have the words with the music. Darling, darling, a bird is calling over the hill and over the lea. The
sun has risen, the dew cease falling. Darling, darling, come back to me. Darling, darling, the wind is singing, blowing a welcoming, fresh and free. Where is thy musical laughter ringing? Darling, darling, come back to me. Darling, darling, the light is gliding in and out from tree to tree, trying to find where thou art hiding. Darling, darling, come back to me. Darling, darling, my heart is yearning. What is the summer bereft of thee? Day has no dawn, the night no turning. Darling, darling, come back to me.
Michael and Elaine, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Good evening. All of the quotes you will hear tonight are taken from original historical documents. We begin with a reading from Mrs. Trask's first published work, a travel book, Colorado Leaves. 6 adult friends travel by train out west to visit the newly formed state of Colorado, only 2 years old. In this scene, the party is slowly ascending one of the Rocky Mountains, 14,000-foot Gray's Peak. The author, Kate Nichols Trask, we'll get to Katrina later, describes the scene.
By and by, like a sudden burst of music, the whole glory and wonder of the mountain range, with the snow upon their sides and their crowns of clouds, appeared to us through an opening in the trees. Our very souls seemed to expand and spread their wings as we looked, so that it was almost pain to endure the bondage of the flesh. Along the road was thickly sprinkled the profusion of wildflowers. That is such a marked feature of Colorado, a feature that, without our consciousness, added a charm to every scene, made a foreground of color to every landscape, and a constant, though unobtrusive proof of the infinite power beyond us, infinite variety, infinite beauty, infinite color, not only in our way, but among the rocks, tucked under the bushes, in little far-off places where no foot had been, were blooming the wild, irregular, graceful flowers in red, purple, deep gold, and countless colors, with thousands and thousands of varying shades.
Colorado Leaves was a promising debut for the young author. In the summer of 1878, when this book takes place, Kate was 25 years old. She had married Spencer Trask 4 years earlier. Her first son, Alanson, was almost 3, and her daughter, Christina, was only 1 year old. The family lived in Brooklyn, where both Katrina and Spencer had grown up. Less than 2 years later, her eldest child, Alanson, would die of an unnamed childhood illness. In 1880, nearly a third of all children in the United States did not live past their 5th birthday. In her grief, Kate's health, already compromised during the birth of her daughter, broke down completely. In search of healing, the Trasks looked for a country retreat and found the child's estate in Saratoga Springs. Saratoga was synonymous with health for many reasons, not just the springs.
Saratoga has, for so many years, held the distinction of being the most healthful and attractive vacation spot in this country. A dry and rarefied atmosphere, tinged by the scent of pine and healing balsam, mineral springs, quiet, comfort, perfect living accommodations at varying cost. Beautiful surroundings, every incentive to outdoor life and exercise. And above all, that peculiar tonic property in air and soil that retunes the nerves and puts the tired brain and body into harmony with each other and the world.
The move to Saratoga was the first major accommodation in Kate's 41-year search for health and healing, a quest that would continue until her death in 1922. A friend, Elizabeth Jordan, later reminisced about visiting Mrs. Trask around 1908, quote, "Friends who came to her for weekends were warned not to be alarmed if Mrs. Trask suddenly had a heart attack, and never to feel themselves responsible for it. Such attacks came constantly, we were assured. Mrs. Trask wore around her neck a small gold whistle whose summons would bring help from every part of the great house. If she became unconscious, anybody with her was to give the signal. She was, of course, never left alone," end quote. Descriptions at the time mentioned, quote, arterial trouble, quote, blood tension, and repeated, quote, hemorrhages in the eye, and pain. Kate's body weakened over time, and by 1914, she was a permanent invalid. Notice that in the museum's collection of Katrina Trask's clothing, most of the pieces are robes. These are from later in her life, except that one, which shows her as a young, slim, beautiful socialite. And that was part of her life as well. Back to 1881, when the Trasks first began summering in Saratoga. Spencer got busy renovating the existing mansion and fixing up the grounds.
The farm comprises 145 acres. On the hill where the mansion is located, the view is one of the finest in this part of the country.
The Trask's daughter, Christina, was only 4 years old.
She had heard us say our life was shadowed, and she shrank from the association. Christina told us, "Call it Yaddo, for it makes poetry. It sounds like a shadow, but it will not be a shadow."
Spencer was a doer, and as Mrs. Trask described in 1888, his motto was
Facta non verba.
action, not words. Many thanks to Yaddo for the recent open house. Spencer's motto was captured forever in the second mansion in a shield added to the music room window sometime after 1897, when Spencer's heraldic emblem became the pine. Spencer immersed himself in property improvements the same way that he would over and over again for future Trask properties and various philanthropic endeavors. The Saratogian, June 1882.
Mr. Trask himself has been the chief designer and architect, which, with Mrs. Trask's rare and cultivated taste in decorative art, has produced a home that leaves nothing to be desired.
Saratoga, a magnet for the wealthy in the summer season, was a perfect place for Spencer to open a summer office for his Wall Street business, Spencer Trask & Co.
Spencer Trask, well known in the financial world as a banker and stockbroker, has rapidly pushed his way to the front rank.
The new office was in the Grand Union Hotel, and Spencer ran the most prominent ad possible on the upper left corner of the Daily Saratogian. You can see Spencer's partner, right here, a little small, George Foster Peabody. More about him later. Mrs. Trask busied herself raising her children and running the Yaddo estate in summer and the Brooklyn home in winter. In 1882, her family and staff at Yaddo put together an elaborate ceremony to crown her the Queen of Yaddo with a new name, Katrina.
I took it for my pen name.
From then on, her books were, quote, by Katrina Trask. Listen to the love that the staff expected from her. Michael reads the role of the Archbishop.
Is your Majesty willing and ready to take the oath?
I am willing.
Will you promise and swear to govern and rule the hearts of all that belong to these lands according to thine own sweet will?
I promise so to do.
Will you foster all seeds of affection, nurture the tender growths, smile benignly upon the opening bud, and bless the full-blown flower, and to the utmost of your power, promote and maintain the laws of the sweet God of love?
All this I promise.
During the 1880s, Katrina's writing continued in private as she and Spencer kept detailed journals which they called the Chronicles of Yaddo. These chronicles would burn in the fire in 1891. What did survive was a 195-page book she wrote in 1888 and had privately printed for friends about her daughter Christina, who had died at age 11 the year before. As Katrina's heart troubles continued, she spent a lot of time lying down. This is her in her tower room in the first mansion. This one is my favorite. While Katrina lay sick, she allowed her daughter to run free at Yaddo. Quote, Christina was left very much alone, growing beside me, wild and undisciplined, drinking in the sunshine and the dew, with buoyant, ringing laughter and untrammeled spirits. If there was any fear in the wise old heads that watched the liberty I gave her, it was that she would be too wild, too tomboyish, which friendly anxiety she increased by declaring, quote, I know God intended me for a boy and changed his mind at the last moment. So there is a certain amount of boy in me that has to come out. Katrina described her daughter Christina's wonderful life. A little figure in a rough blue flannel dress perched high upon a hay wagon, or best of all, standing beside one of the farmers who were all Christina's friends, in a long farm wagon with her straight hair blowing in the wind, her old felt hat hanging by a string while she drove a pair of heavy horses. Christina trusted her mother.
She never hesitated to tell me her most precious secret, her most dear and foolish folly. She was not afraid of me, because she knew that I understood her. I count it one of the blessings of my life that my two most intimate women friends have been my mother when I was a child, and my child when I was a mother.
On March 12, 1887, Katrina was diagnosed with diphtheria, a disease that spreads through respiratory droplets. We all know about that. Bacteria enters the system and causes a thick gray film to form in the throat and nose that makes breathing and swallowing difficult. Death from choking was a common outcome, especially for children. Christina and her younger brother, Spencer Jr., were sent away as Katrina entered quarantine, quickly sickened, and nearly died. Slowly, Katrina rallied when the doctors realized that she was safely on the road to recovery. They lifted the quarantine.
Every precaution had been taken, And the period of danger the doctors agreed was over for the children and for Mr. Trask.
The doctors knew how contagious diphtheria was. They knew Katrina had to quarantine. Surely the best doctors that money could buy gave the all clear at the wrong time.
Suddenly, the sweet, hushed, silent, smiling peace of convalescence was gone. Spencer Jr. was desperately and Christina seriously ill.
The children are described as having bandages on their necks, probably indicating tracheotomy, a surgical cut to the windpipe to help with breathing. Within days, both children were dead, while Katrina lay recovering in another room facing emotional devastation as well as ongoing physical pain.
I was throbbing still with the agony of that worst of all diseases. The doctors came and went with a faithful devotion far beyond the limits of professional interest. They stood and fought the fatal poison day and night with a skill and exhaustive experiment that would have saved our children if human means could have done it.
16 months later, in August of 1889, Katrina would give birth to her fourth and last child, a girl who lived only 11 days. Back to Spencer. During the 1880s, Spencer busied himself not only with improving Yaddo, but also with improving the village of Saratoga Springs. Saratoga became a city in 1915. The Trasks were Episcopalians, and the Bishop of Albany, William Doane, was a great friend. In 1875, Bishop Doane had initiated a Saratoga summer branch of the Child's Hospital of Albany, which in 1881 occupied a rented building on Lake Avenue. October 15, 1884.
The real estate office, Conkling and Knapp, has sold for the owners to Spencer Trask the Finley Mansion and 6 3/4 acres, located on Ballston Avenue.
4 months later,
we understand that Spencer Trask will tender the use of the Finley Mansion as a convalescent home for the inmates of the Child's Hospital of Albany. It will be used by them during the summer months.
Today, Price Chopper's Market 32 sits, oh, I'm sorry, I missed a slide. Today, Price Chopper's Market 32 sits on this spot. Spencer set about property improvements, and by the time the Weekly Saratogian visited 2 years later,
Mr. Spencer Trask, the banker and broker, with rare generosity, bought the present site, remodeled the building, partly furnished it, and then presented it to the home. The improvements have been made for comfort, regardless of cost.
the Trasks christened it St. Christina's after their daughter, who had died just a few months before the opening. This building is the Finley Mansion after Spencer's renovation, and in the next image, you'll see the schoolroom addition, which the Trasks later added. As Katrina would write in an essay entitled Wild Rose Candy,
the buildings were given and the work was begun as a memorial by a sorrowing father and mother.
a staff of 10, including 2 religious sisters, took care of 72 children.
The home, a massive stone building, stands in an attractive grove about 100 yards away from the highway, with cool, refreshing, spacious grounds all around it, on which children, dressed in neat frocks, snow-white collars, and with bright, happy faces, amused themselves swinging in hammocks and large swings, playing at ball, lawn tennis, croquet, and other mild outdoor exercises.
Spencer paid for the property and prepared the buildings, but in terms of initiative, ideas, and oversight, St. Christina's really was Katrina's project.
Mrs. Trask gives immensely to Saratoga charities. St. Christina's home is entirely supported by her, being her own institution.
The Child's Hospital of Albany was there in summer. In winter, St. Christina's Industrial School for Girls trained students for jobs in service. At that time, orphanages kept girls only through age 14.
The problem of the young girl who has had the state support until 14 years of age, and then, unfitted and untrained, is turned upon the world without guardian or guide, is one of the most serious problems of our social life. The great need of a post-orphan asylum course was so deeply felt by the donors that St. Christina's School was established. The courses are elective, each pupil choosing whether she will take fine sewing, fine cooking, or a housemaid's course. In the domestic art course, the pupil learns not only to do plain sewing, but to cut, to embroider, and to make French underwear, shirtwaists, and table linen. In the domestic science course, the girls have a practical training in the school kitchen, where they prepare meals for the entire household, learn food combinations and values, they plan menus, serve dinners and courses, in short, have a thorough practical training which fits them to be first-class cooks.
The girls came from orphanages.
I would choose, as far as possible, girls who have no parents. It would be easy to find 3 or 4 from 10 or 12 different orphan asylums in different cities.
Full-time girls could earn a diploma after 4 years of study. There were also night courses for local working girls.
As I foresee it, there is no reason why the St. Christina's School should not become a factor in the working world of America, and its very name become a synonym for honest work of high quality and of a thorough training.
Meanwhile, Spencer joined in with various other efforts in the village of Saratoga. In November of 1883, he was one of the corporators listed in the Articles of Incorporation for the new Saratoga Historical Society, which would eventually become the Saratoga Springs History Museum. The Trasks were great supporters of their church, Bethesda Episcopal, and its causes. In 1884, soon after Spencer Jr.'s baptism, the Trasks donated Bethesda's stunning eagle lectern fabricated by the J.R. Lamb Company in Spencer Jr.'s name.
Upon the many thousand hearers who will hereafter sit beneath the outspread wings of this king of birds, emblem of St. John, and symbol of the glorious liberty of the children of God, will descend the blessed word as messenger of comfort and of life.
Spencer presented Bethesda with its first pipe organ in 1899. The $10,000 he paid for it would today be worth $325,000. Later, the Trasks would fund a new parish house at 41 Washington Street, which is still standing today. In 1889, the Saratoga Union newspaper reported on the main chancel window above Bethesda's altar.
The design was by Mrs. Trask, and the subject is Christ at the Pool of Bethesda.
Of note here is the supreme presence of Christ. He is not in a scene in a town or encircled by angels. He is on his own against the sky. The prominence of Christ is Katrina's statement. More on that later. Bethesda also channeled many personal appeals Katrina's direction, with the details lost to history.
In whatever has been done for the children of the parish, for the poor, the sick, and the needy, she has always had a considerate share. Just how far her sweet spirit has ministered with comfort and sweet loving friendship in the homes of the people of this city, none can ever know save God alone.
But Spencer's most significant Saratoga project was the development of an overarching vision for the village that he pursued the rest of his life. The Trasks had traveled extensively in Europe and were familiar with successful spa towns like Vichy in France, Baden-Baden in Germany, and Bath in England. Many other Saratogians were not. The Trasks were aware that Saratoga's superb wealth of mineral waters had led to its explosive growth as a spa destination without the development of a sustainable infrastructure of amenities that compared favorably with Europe's spa destinations. First, Saratoga lacked an infrastructure of well-equipped, well-run, scientifically improved bathhouses. Second, there wasn't a downtown public park. In England and Europe, every town has a beautiful downtown park for healthy walks in natural landscaping. The Trasks were from Brooklyn, where Prospect Park had just been completed in 1873 and nearby New York Central Park in 1876. Beginning in the 1890s, the City Beautiful movement saw new downtown parks and park monuments installed in many American cities. In 1881, if you stood at this end of the casino and looked northwest toward the Spirit of Life, this is what you saw. In front, the Congress Spring Company. Right here, this is the Congress Spring Company, and back here is the massive 6-story Congress Hall Hotel, which extended all the way to the corner, and right down here is where the Arts Council sits today, underneath that spot. There was a much smaller park located south of Congress Street, so down there in the southern tip of the park. That was owned by the Congress Spring Company, but it charged admission with season passes available. That small park offered live music from a Victorian bandstand, weekly fireworks, a deer lodge, a cafe, an arcade, and a trout pool filled with, quote, speckled beauties. Up until 1911, the only parks available near downtown Saratoga that were free and open to the public were private estates. Judge Hilton's Woodlawn Estate, which today is the Skidmore College campus, that was maintained by Judge Hilton for public use. And from 1881 onward, the Trasks maintained their Yaddo estate as a public park. That is why there are so many early postcards of Yaddo, and why in all the guidebooks and souvenir photo books of the time, there are images of, quote, the Yaddo. Saratogians swam and fished in Yaddo's lakes. They picnicked on Yaddo's lawns. They took carriage rides on Yaddo's drives. As Katrina's 1922 obituary recalled,
the grounds of Yaddo were made by the Trasks in nature, a public park to which Saratogians and their guests have ever been welcome. In that act alone, the Lady of Yaddo permitted something of the spirit that pervades Yaddo to be infused in the hundreds of thousands who have visited there.
Third, in Spencer's vision, Saratoga's healthy spa atmosphere was at odds with the pervasive presence of illegal gambling. John Morrissey built this building as the Saratoga Clubhouse in 1870, an exclusive gambling club where only men over 21 from out of town were allowed. The New York Sun, August 1876.
Those who have not partaken of Mr. Morrissey's bounteous hospitality, have not tasted of his delicious woodcock, have not quaffed of his excellent frappé champagne, have not played at those charming little games of roulette, faro, and trente e quarante, which he amiably provides for the entertainment of his guests, cannot really say they have been at Saratoga. Morrissey's gambling rooms are patronized by rather an aristocratic class. You're always sure of meeting good society at his tables, and if one is really bent upon going to the devil, it would certainly seem desirable to make the journey in a first-class conveyance, surrounded by agreeable society.
Now, let's listen to Katrina In her 1917 reminiscences, looking back at Morrissey's clubhouse, only she's going to call it Canfield's gambling house because Richard Canfield had taken it over by 1884.
In 1881, upon the edge of the park, facing the visitors, the youths, and the little children, stood in wanton effrontery that gaping, ominous gambling hell, with all its enticements and all its dangers. Moreover, the park, which should have been a place of green pastures and refreshment, was instead a hectic spot environed by evil and haunted by gamblers, crooks, and wanton women, the habitués of the Canfield gambling house.
Spencer gathered like-minded citizens to work together as he would for all of his major projects. He also made enemies. He purchased a newspaper, the Saratoga Union, to tell the news and to give him a platform for opposing the gambling industry. August 28th, 1889.
The gamblers are notified that there are those in the community who will not tolerate the subversion of law and justice.
The Saratogian newspaper took the other side from the 1890 editorials.
June 5th, Mr. Trask's verbatim dirty linen sheet. June 5th, the various and versatile misinformation packed into Trask's paper. July 3rd, we are actually becoming weary of the task of instructing the callow crowd in charge of the Trask affair with the misnomer of newspaper. August 9th, the asinine utterances of Mr. Trask's Saratoga sheet.
With the frequent public anti-Trask comments in the daily paper in a town where gamblers felt threatened, is it really a coincidence that on March 10th of 1891, the Yaddo mansion caught fire? The Albany Times did have a legitimate explanation.
2 carpenters were working on the ground floor of that part of the building and had a fire in the chimney fireplace, burning blocks of wood, chips, and other refuse, when Martin Sullivan,
The Trask's coachman, remember that name,
rushed in, shouted, "The house is on fire in the top story." All hands rushed to the top story. The carpenters ripped off the baseboards where smoke and tongues of flame were seen around the chimney. And in that spot it was found that the flames were eating away fiercely.
They realized they couldn't put the fire out themselves, so the men on site began carrying out everything they could.
The team, driven by Will Ryle,
Remember that name, Will Ryle, the gardener who drove the team of horses.
The team, driven by Will Ryle, was sent flying downtown, and the men on the place began saving property. First of all, taken from the house were the valuable oil paintings. Among the pictures saved were oil portraits of the 2 children of Mr. and Mrs. Trask, who died some years ago.
Those portraits, hanging in the music room today at Yaddo, were rushed out of that fire. Artist Eastman Johnson had painted the children just a few months after their deaths in April of 1887.
Employees in the house and on the farm were trying to save all they could. They began removing the furniture. Everything except some of the furniture in the kitchen was removed. Costly bric-a-brac and antiques that were near the center of the house are among the destroyed articles. In less than an hour, all that remained of the beautiful residence were 3 chimneys and the basement stone walls.
Spencer, sick with pneumonia in New York, immediately committed to rebuild, and today's mansion was completed 2 years later in 1893.